Start my report. Okay. Hello, everybody, and Happy New Year. Welcome to the STC's Philadelphia Metro Chapter's January 2022 webinar. We're really thrilled to have Stephanie Saylor, who's going to be giving us a presentation on improving tech comm through road signs and everyday experiences. Now, I got a glimpse of what tonight's presentation is going to be. Not only from rehearsal, but also she'd given a similar presentation at the STC Summit last year. So I think you're going to be in for a really great treat. It's a really great presentation. Just to cover a few things before we get started with Stephanie. Whoops. See, technical difficulties already. Just wanted to go over a little bit of chapter stuff before we get started. Just so you know, we have for our upcoming events, next month we're going to have another webinar, which is going to be about data analytics in content. I just got the description tonight, so I don't have the exact title yet, but it's, let me see, I'm pulling it up on my iPad as we speak. It's embedding performance support tools within help architecture. Rob Sims, who's a member of the Philadelphia chapter, has been putting this information together, and he felt that it's a case study to demonstrate how performance support tools can help deliver in-the-moment help to software users as they interact with an application, and how we as technical communicators can use those tools. So that should be a really interesting event. And I've seen, again, a preview of some of his slides. It looks really good. Also later in the year, or as we speak, we're working on getting more students involved. So if you know any students who are in the Delaware Valley, either attending a school in the Delaware Valley or lives in the Delaware Valley, but maybe attends a school elsewhere, who is involved in tech comm, and they're interested in participating in our chapter, as well as possibly getting some scholarship money to help with their tuition a little bit. We're going to be working on that, and we have a lot more going on. So stay tuned and check our social media outlets, as well as your email, for more information going forward for this spring. Want to encourage everybody to remember to renew or join STC because there's a lot of great benefits, including professional networking, professional education, discounts on education at STC Summit. And right now we decided to extend our raffle. Right now, if you renew or join by January 31st, originally it was January 1st, but we extended to the 31st. You will be entered into a raffle for not a $25 gift card, which we originally decided on, but we decided to up the ante and give you $50 if you win. So that not only covers the cost of your chapter membership, but you could even possibly get another one. So go for it if you can. And lastly, we want to say that we need you right now. The Philadelphia chapter is looking for volunteers to help rebuild our council. As you know, we've kind of gotten to a point where we really need to have more input. We do have some people who have stepped up, but we're really going to be looking for some people to step up in positions such as our president, program manager, our treasurer, secretary, and being members of our programming and membership and communications committee. So we would really love to have you step up. Like I said, you don't have to be the leader, but you can definitely help out. We can use all the help we can get. If you're interested, just drop me a note at president@stc.org and let's talk. Okay, so on that note, let me stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to turn this over to Stephanie. So let me make Stephanie a presenter, and I'll let her introduce herself to you. And we're really thrilled to have you, Stephanie. I've been waiting for months for this presentation, so I think everybody else is going to enjoy this as well.
Thank you. I hope so. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here. So I hope we can have a little bit of time and bring a refresher to some folks who have already worked on some of the stuff. Thanks. And then if it's new to you, we can learn some new things. As first, to get started, like Danielle said, I didn't thank you. Thank you for doing everything, Danielle, and setting it up and making it so easy for me. So
you're welcome.
I appreciate that.
No problem. And just a little housekeeping thing before you get started too. We're going to be having a chat. So if you have any questions for Stephanie along the way, feel free to either pipe in, or you can put the notes in the chat, and I'll I'll tell her what's going on as well. And if you want to mute your mic in between, that will be helpful too, so we can all hear what's going on.
A little bit about me, I've been a technical communicator for it's about 17 years, and I started to morph into UX writing, and now I'm currently doing a little bit of both. Some technical, I'm working as a writer in some projects and a user engineer on other projects at Yellow Duck Technologies. It's a small software company in Central Maryland. That's where I'm from, and let's just get started. But before we do, I don't want to assume that everyone has read The Design of Everyday Things. If you haven't, make sure that you add that to your to-read list for 2022. When Donald Norman wrote 1988, he was on the forefront of our profession. And this was a whole decade before he was the second N in Norman. The principles that he talked about and the topics that he discussed still apply to the screens that we work on today, and even the screens and the technology that has advanced since then. Things that were not even imagined in 1988 still use the principles that Norman put into The Design of Everyday Things about how to make things work for our users. So I know there's people out there that are not Donald Norman fans, but even if you're not, it's hard to dispute the contributions that he's made to the field, and especially with the design of everyday things. So let me tell you a little bit about why I started this. I didn't read this book. UX really wasn't a thing whenever I was in undergrad. You know, it was, but it wasn't on the forefront. Like most schools didn't promote it like they do now. And whenever I went to graduate school, I was assigned the design of everyday things, and it was perfect for me. At that time, I was pretty crazy. I was working full time. I was going to graduate school. My dad had just moved into assisted living, and I had a toddler. So needless to say, as much as I was at a point in my life where I wanted to advance professionally and better my skills, I was just trying to survive, and I felt really guilty that I wasn't reading the best professional blogs all the time or looking at all the scholarly articles. But what Donald Norman taught me at that point was that the two most important characteristics of good design are discoverability and understanding. And I applied that. He made me realize that I should observe the world around me and apply it to my work. Now, we're all technical communicators. This is what we do, right? We look around and we observe, think about work and how it could be better. That's just part of our innate DNA, right? It's just part of the reason we probably got into this field. So me, at that point, I thought, okay, I'm not doing enough other places. I'm going to make this my job. One observation a day. I'm not just going to be like, oh, that's a dumb way to make the checkout line, but I'm going to think, why? Why is that? Why do I think that's dumb? What did they do wrong that could have been done better? Or what's something that was done really well, and why does it work so well? So whenever I started doing that, I started to see stuff everywhere. It was really fun. And it helped me see that some of these broad ideas can apply to not just the good ideas and the bad, could be applied to the work that I was doing at my job and make my documentation or the interfaces that I was looking at better. Now, this is pretty broad, right? Whatever you're working on, you for it in real life and just improve your skills. You know, Beaver voice, look for B verbs. If you're working on forms, you look for forms. For this, or look at the forms that you work with, the forms that you find online to make it better. For this presentation, I'll focus on Norman principles of his book, starting with affordance is the relationship between an object and a person. It's a relationship, not a property, and you have to think about needs to or is for. The example in the book is a chair, and Norman says that a chair is for support. It affords sitting. Things can have more than one affordance. So it's not just a chair. If you need to get something on a higher shelf, it's also a step stool. Whenever you are doing your work, the first thing you want to think about when you have a new assignment, new feature, new set of directions, is think about what the affordance is in the situation where you're working. What is it for? And that's how you want to concentrate your information for your users. Affordances and signifiers go hand in hand. Norman says that affordances determine what actions are possible, but they signify what, but signifiers signify what we are supposed to do. Some are better than others, like this chair that I have the picture of here. Do you see the way it has a concave seat, like the bottom of us? So it's like, oh, that's giving us a little hint what we're supposed to put there. The Chipotle app, those have those little pictures they put beside each one of the menu items, gives us an idea about what's coming. I'm sure everyone's probably familiar with Norman doors. They're very famous. If you Google them, well, we're in our meeting, but right after, and you'll get all sorts of ideas about how the push bars on doors can be placed at really odd places, and then people take pictures and call them the Norman doors. You know what I'm talking about for the most part, because Norman will find all sorts of doors that are not intuitive and says, you know, you have to look for a good signifier. That's what makes things work really well. When you're working on interfaces, think about how you can make your affordances more recognizable with signifiers. An example that I have jotted down here is one particular one that I'm thinking of. I had this one project where the icons didn't make sense and the user was wedded to them. We had to keep those icons no matter what. So something that we did to try to make the signifier better was just to add the text, kind of like Chipotle here, where they put the word beside it. So if you have to work with something that doesn't make sense, think about how you can improve that signifier to help your users, give them the signal to make it work for them. We're going to stay on signifiers for a minute, because this is a place where it could apply to the real world and everything around us. Flags and semiotics in general are just what Norman calls indicators in the most literal sense. They're signifiers, and whenever he talks about flags, he gets right down to like the absolute gritty part of it. He says flags are used to indicate motion, and that's totally true. That's their affordance, but you have to also remember that whoever put the flag there might also have different ideas about what they want that flag to convey. It may be beliefs or unity, identity. Whenever you're working on a project, think about what you're supposed to convey. And if you have to work on projects that have this kind of big overarching idea about who you're representing, remember that applying the right these principles of good flag design could serve you well. Things that are as easy as remembering that a child can draw it from memory. If any guesses which US flag this is? It's the only one that's not rectangular. I'll give you, I'm not looking at the chat. I feel like I should just tell you now because it makes me happy.
Yeah, there's nothing in the chat, although I'm still thinking and trying to guess. I'm going to guess Hawaii, but I don't think that's right.
That's a good guess. It's not nearly as tropical. It is Ohio, which my husband's from Ohio. He's very proud that Ohio has the most recognizable flag in the Union. Yeah. But this one, it's definitely different from all the other ones. Once you know it, when you see it, you'll know moving forward. But you want to provide meaningful symbolism, and basically with things that you have to bring across what you stand for, you only want to use 2 or 3 colors and be distinctive. Logos do this really well. They apply those principles of good flag design, and they convey their meanings in ways that we don't even realize that they're nudging us. Like the way the FedEx logo has that the arrow to show us that everything's moving really subtly, or the way McDonald's makes their golden arches look like French fries. Burger King's is pretty obvious, and it's my last time with the concave shape, right? But do you see Levi's use the same shape that we see on chairs to remind us what the main center of their business is? There are all sorts of things like this that you can find in everyday life. And once you start thinking about it, it's pretty fun to think about the projects that you're working on and ways that you could use them. Road signs are one of my favorite, probably because I've lived and worked off of 95 for 2 decades. And if you think about how many people have to move through all these giant roads and how well they do it, there's a lot of science that's gone into it. For example, do you know that the affordance of this prepare to stop sign is to get your brain to subconsciously start thinking about stopping? The sign, which is obviously a signifier, is designed to be ignored. It's called cognitive priming, and at an unconscious level, it increases our concentration and decreases our reaction time. This goes into other signs that we might take for granted every day, like the dynamic signs that grab our attention a full second before the signs with no implied motion. So if you look at one of these traditional signs where people are standing calmly at a crosswalk, your brain isn't gonna connect it as fast as whenever you see a sign with someone like a kid on a scooter or any sort of implied motion. That gets to that primal part of our brain that says, wait, something bad could happen, and that subconsciously makes us more alert. I relate this to some of the forms that we work on. Whenever we give people the hint text that goes under each field, lots of people are going to ignore it, but they prime people in case there is an error. They're going to know where to look to get more information about it. Now, lots of people won't read it, but if you can give them as much information as you can right there, it will help them get back on track. You know, Norman says we should try to design things to never need error messages. And that's, of course, common sense. Everyone wants to make a form that people can go through quickly and easily and not get tripped up. But when you're thinking about why people make errors, it's often related to mapping, which is his next principle. So mapping is the relationship between two elements. In the design of everyday things, Norman talks about light switches. And I had to laugh because I had not reread the book in the couple years between when I moved into this house. This is a picture of one of my light switches. The previous owners labeled pretty much every light switch that had more than 2 switches. And they, in the rooms where they only had 2 switches, they didn't put any of the labels on them. That was probably because they use the common practice of wiring the closest light to the closest switch. So light switch on the right turns on the right light. One on the left turns on the switch that's on the left side of the room. Whenever you're working on interfaces or even in your documentation, you have to figure out what the common practices are in the area that you're working in that industry, and figure out what the standard mapping is to make sure that you can make things a whole lot more understandable and easier to understand for your users. I just said that 3 times. I twisted my words up. I got it. You know what I mean though. These simple mapping techniques save time and frustration. So at this point, I'm going to take a minute because you've been listening to my voice way too long, and ask all of you to look around the room and see what is mapped well or mapped poorly where you are. It's kind of nice that we're all in different places. So if you see anything, feel free to.
I can tell you, it's not in my room here, but I can tell you I've had the same light switch issue, which even to this day, I've lived in this house for 15 years and I still can't quite get it right. There's a light switch that's, I think, 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I think it's a 3 as well. I know the one on the far right is for the main light that's in my foyer. The middle one, I'm not sure. The one on the left is for outside, but like the middle one and the left one are both for outside, but they have different functions. Like one makes it automatic and one makes it like doing it manually, and I get it confused. So one of these days I'm sure I will label it, but I never get it straight. I usually have to ask my husband because he has it figured out. So I can totally relate to this example 100%. I just stuck in the dark outside instead, you know.
Me too. Lori, I saw you unmuted. Did you have an idea you wanted to share?
I was going to suggest Danielle apply labels, but she said she's going to do that.
Someday.
I can tell you, like for, I don't know, I mean, this is more electronic than your example here. It's not as physical, but like on my thermostat, you know, or on any of these electronic things like a clock radio or something, where you have to just keep hitting buttons to cycle through functions.
Yes.
That is generally kind of problematic. You have to do it like 3 or 4 times because there's very few indicators as to, like on my thermostat, like I hit the thing once and something flashes, and then I have to hit it again, and like I can then go to change the temperatures. You have to do it several times and go through several settings before you really understand what it's doing. And I know there are limited electronic signals in those things, so there's only so much they can do with it, but it's really annoying.
I know exactly.
Especially because I only do it once a year. It'd be different if I was, you know, setting it up like every other week, then I'd have it down. Like the guy who came and installed it, like,
Right.
oh, it's easy, just boom, 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 boom. I'm like, okay.
Right. Maureen, what did you have to share?
I have a lighting situation as well. My house is not very large, and I have this square, it's almost like a square living room. So on the other side of my main staircase that goes up to my second floor, I have a light switch. And next to the light switch, I have a piano and I have a floor lamp. So you would think that the light switch on the wall would turn on the floor lamp, but no, it turns on the hall light upstairs on the second floor and would turn the lamp on by the switch on the lamp. You would think that the light switch would be at the bottom of the staircase, but there's no light switch there.
See,
I
once
still
you
trip
start
over the dog trying to turn the light on at night when I go to bed.
Yeah. Albar just chimed in. He's like, that's confusing. It is. I was just even thinking of one that you were saying in my office when I looked over. I was like, well, duh, here's an electronics one. Is that I have to label, I don't know about anybody else, but when I started my job, they sent me my laptop and 2 monitors and all sorts of things. I could never tell when I set up 2 monitors which one is screen 1 and screen 2, and I actually had to put a label on both of them to say which one was screen 1 and screen 2, and then there's a docking station. And to know if there's a problem, if I have to connect them or disconnect them, I had to put labels on which one's monitor 1 and which one's monitor 2, so I can say, okay, that one goes to this one, that wire goes to this one, and when I'm online, then I go back and forth, and I know which one I'm looking at. So yeah, that can get confusing. And screen 2 is on my left, and screen 1 is on my right because it just aligned best. But it's
whatever works.
Another very subtle one is like a USB cable, because it's really not clear what's upside down and what's right side up, and you kind of have to jam it in and try again, and it's really subtle. I don't know why those were ever not more clearly indicated which side is up, but they weren't.
Anything I have to turn on the lights and like shine it in there to get it, you know that's not right. It shouldn't be that hard to just do your job.
Well, Apple was into minimalism. What can you say?
Yep.
And they came out with it, so.
Oh,
That's right.
those are great examples. Thank you guys. I enjoy just hearing about all of them. That chapter in the design of everyday things is so fun because Norman actually built himself a light switch that he could like carry around with him with a map of his house. And he's like, this should sell. People should want this. And I'm sure everyone would, but I can't imagine what it would take to put that in place in everyone's house. So it's fun to hear about other people's houses and the things that just don't quite make sense all the time, even around us everywhere we go. I think of it at work whenever the sidewalk curves around where they want you to walk, but then all the grass is always gone and the straight through the pretty grass that they don't want us to walk there. It's like they should have just looked at where people are going to go and pave that part so you don't have the ugly muddy trail of people taking the shortcut. But Lori, did you have something else?
Yeah, I wanted to just say that I was very lucky that I built this house and I was able to design how the light fixtures went, how the switches went, and it all makes sense. So I'm a very happy customer.
That's awesome. No label maker for you.
Nope.
Nice.
But to your point,
Um,
with the pathways, that's how they did it at Rider University. My father was part of the first graduating class to spend all 4 years at the current campus when it was
yeah.
moved from Trenton to Lawrenceville, New Jersey. And they did not build sidewalks right away. They waited to see where the students walked along the paths, and then they built the sidewalks later. So they kind of had that in mind. It's pretty cool.
That's so clever. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
That's
Yeah,
actually
confused,
very,
but yeah.
yeah, paving the cow path has always been like a kind of principle of, you know, it's always it's the most direct route. It's the route that people take. It's like a landscape design thing.
That's awesome. I didn't even know that. I just think of the mud hole every time I'm walking out of my building and I see everyone that has gone through, which makes sense because it's the fastest way.
Supposedly, that's why the Boston streets are the way they are. They largely paved the cow paths.
I
They're
didn't
not
know
very
that.
narrow.
Very cool. I'll move on to Norman's next principle now. This one's a big one. It's about constraints. And constraints are used to guide actions and ease interpretation. Casey Kwiatek had a good visual metaphor. She said, think of a jail cell. People can move around and interact, but they're confined to specific parameters. First one's pretty obvious. We know what physical constraints are, actual barriers like a wall or an application container on your smartphone. Logical constraints are spatial layouts. Think about doorbells, or you probably put your cups beside your coffee pot. Norman said that logical constraints guide behavior, how you know when you're finished with it. They help you know how you're finished when you're finished with a task. Making the fundamental design model visible allows users to readily and logically deduce what actions are required. Cultural constraints are culturally allowable actions. Alan, I'm so glad you're here. My favorite example for this is the Pittsburgh left. So I usually ask people if they know what the Pittsburgh left is, but we have a real Pittsburgher that knows it. Do you want to explain it or do you want me to explain it?
Let me try. So
Okay.
the Pittsburgh left, if you are at a stoplight and you're making a left turn and there's oncoming traffic, they also have the red. The Pittsburgh left is you gun it and turn left in front of the oncoming car before they can make it.
See, the oncoming car is supposed to stop for you. It's like a polite thing. We're on the same page. I just remember it probably more fondly because I left so long ago. But like,
Yeah.
whenever the light turns green, straight ahead driver stays stopped on purpose to be nice to let turning driver turn left. It's a cultural constraint that, or it's a cultural behavior, which cultural constraints are culturally allowable actions that people in Pittsburgh generally know what to do. They understand that this is what we do at red lights because we're nice people. And then Pittsburgh people move to Baltimore and almost die when people are like, what do you mean you want me to wait for you to make your left? So I had a very scary experience when I left Pittsburgh because I didn't get a Pittsburgh left anymore. It was a cultural action that I was used to. And then whenever you dump me into a different culture, it completely messed everything up.
Well, then you've got New Jersey where we don't even have the left turns. We have jug handles, so we don't even get into that situation in that respect. You don't have too many left turns unless there's a special left lane to do it. It's either you have a left lane to turn left or you've got a jug handle. And people are so confused by jug handles. We're like, why? Or going around traffic circles. There's a lot of those as well, and how you merge in or merge out for those as well. There's
Yeah,
definitely a big
Danielle,
part of
the
it.
issue, just a comment about jug handles from someone who briefly lived in Jersey and isn't from Jersey. The problem is, you know you're going to be making a left, but you don't know you have to be in the right lane to do it.
Right.
That is the fundamental issue with jug handles.
See, whereas I
In traffic
always
circles,
think
who
it's a
knows?
jug handle, there's a left turn, I see a right lane, okay, and so left, even off,
Well, they aren't always
Stephanie
marked,
mentioned
so I mean, it's just intuitive. You're driving, you're like, okay, I'm going to be making a left up here, and then, but you know what? Now we have Siri and all that, so it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
Unless you're in the
Also,
mixing bowl.
Yeah,
The
Lori
mixing
said,
bowl in DC, yes, Siri can't keep up with it. So when you get to the
oh,
mixing bowl
yeah,
down in Northern Virginia, it just spins and spins. It's like,
yeah,
oh, okay, I remember what it used to be like to be
oh
on
yeah,
my own.
you know, forget navigating
There,
around New York and all those one-way streets in some places. Even Philadelphia could be like that for me. You know, it's like, wait, I know they're one-way streets, but there's got to be a left turn I can take somewhere around here to go around the block. And you end up a mile away and having to come back around. It's a mess.
we see cultural constraints everywhere in our everyday life. And I know in our business, a lot of times when you'll read about them, we'll talk about the cultural aspects that relate to like color. You don't want to insult anyone's culture ever with anything by picking a color that might mean something in a different part of the world. But another one that I think doesn't get as much attention is when we come from different cultures. I've worked on systems that have a lot of military guys come in and out. They only work on the system for a couple months at a time before they're transferred to a different section. Those folks don't have the same cultural background that the civilians have that have worked on those same systems for their whole career. It could be decades. So whenever you're working on a system with people that are coming from really different backgrounds and really different cultures, remember that you want to balance the ability to not alienate and confuse those new people that are unfamiliar with the culture, while at the same time you don't want to oversimplify it to the place where you're insulting those longtime users, which can be kind of tricky but fun whenever you're trying to piece out what works best. You know, some folks would, I wonder if that's how it started with all of the text that we can have, that you can turn off all of your first time user prompts whenever they come up. The next constraint that Norman talked about was a semantic constraint. And he says that those are actions that rely on the meaning of the situation and the world around us. This one's easy for us over the last 3 years. COVID-19 has upended all of the semantic constraints that we had about the world. It changed everything we do, from the way we stand in line to the way we order pizza, which a change that I very much approve of. It's just like magic. It appears on my doorstep. I mean, some good has come out of all the awful over the last couple years, even if it is just magic pizza on my doorstep. But anyhow, back on track. With semantic constraints rely on the knowledge of the situation and the world around us, and we have to adapt to how the world changes on everything that we're using. Lots of us were technical communicators or working in this business before smartphones or tablets were even a thing. And Danielle and I were just talking about this last night, about how I remember the first time someone told me to not put my instructions in a PDF. They're like, no, that's not going to be something that just gets printed out. I'm like, I don't know if I believe that. I wish that I would have read Norman's book before I had that kind of closed-minded opinion of it, because we have to embrace the changes that happen around us and adapt really quickly to them to make sure that we're not leaving users behind that have not made the changes yet, but at the same time, not ignoring the people that are already the way the world is pushing us forward. Norman's last principle was force functions, and that's a form of a physical constraint. It's a situation in which the actions are constrained so that failure at one stage prevents the next step from happening. Not checking a box, missing a required field, incorrectly entering a phone number, all forced functions. They stop progress and make you evaluate what went wrong. These are important when you're designing interfaces to make sure that people don't go too far. You don't want to let them get the whole way to the end and then have everything wiped away. Make sure that you find the right places to implement force functions so that you don't frustrate your users and make their experience a lot better. So, now that we've gone over all of Norman's principles, I want to talk a little bit about how we can apply them to our everyday lives. And Norman says, much of our everyday knowledge resides in the world, not, oh, my slide is cut off, not in the head. So I love his quotes. They're all over the place because I think we can learn so much from them. The next couple examples are just things that I've seen around me lately. And not to sound obnoxious, but to go back to what we said at the beginning, as technical communicators, we observe everything. That's just part of who we are and what we do. So here's an example. that I found that helped me with my work. My son needed new shoes, and when I went to Target, they pre-populated the size 6 for his shoe size. And I was like, that's really useful. Thank you, Target. And then I started thinking about this form that I was working on at the same exact time. And I had a list of about 100 workflows that whenever the user would get there, they would have to do a search to find the 3 or 4 that they picked over and over again. We knew that they were only picking 3 or 4, and buying shoes at Target, like, why didn't I give these people a feature bumped up at the top so that you can still have your alphabetical list that you can search through at the bottom, but their last 5 workflows appear above it? So I talked to the dev team, we added that in, and it saved our users a lot of time and frustration. My next example was at Walgreens. I was waiting there one day and watching how many people were getting confused when they were trying to figure out if they should check in for their vaccine right at the wall. Now, if you see that arrow on the check-in sign, I'm sorry, it's blurry. It felt creepy. I'm not gonna lie. Taking a picture of your pharmacist, it was just odd, but I thought it was worth the awkwardness. So anyhow, that arrow, it points to the wall. That's a physical barrier. I'll give them that. But they wanted people to check in right there where it says consultation. So if they would have just cut off the arrow or moved their sign over to that placard that they have to the left of the window where they want people to check in, it would have made everything so much more understandable for everyone that was coming there however long they had it there. I read a lot of children's books with my kids, and I find a lot of inspiration in just fun things that make me inspired professionally. They're not afraid to use crazy fonts or to think of adjectives that we're not always going to think about, except exclaimed. You can tell it's bad when everybody exclaims everything. There's some books like that that never get checked out of the library again. But these Comm books are one of my 4-year-old's favorites. They have subtle breadcrumbs and wayfinding, and they implement wayfinding in a way that's intuitive and easy to navigate. And this was something that, especially the way that they make the page that you're actually on pop out, was something that really inspired me. I changed the color in our Norman section with all of the principles of his book, kind of to copy this sort of idea. So this is one that drives me crazy. I pause Kiwi crates enough to know that whenever I have to go in there, I have to click subscription. So I clicked subscription about 4 times before I realized that I went to the subscription page the very first time. I thought this was just another banner ad on their homepage, that before I noticed that my subscriptions was the whole way down at the bottom of my monitor. Made me start thinking that I haven't talked to my users lately about their monitor size, to think about what they're using my stuff on. Are they still looking at it on the same size screen that they used to be, or has that changed? Whenever you're looking at things that don't work for you in real life, ask yourself, am I giving my users, the people that I work for, the same type of frustration whenever they're looking at my stuff?
To that point, you might say, I was going to say, one of the points that you always hear these days, I guess it depends on your audience and what your product is mobile first, because you're using a very small screen, even though you might have different phone sizes. The principle is you're going to look at something real tiny versus a big monitor screen, and you have to make all the adjustments between all those sizes, from the smallest to the biggest and everything between, which is, with the responsive design, that's a big thing nowadays.
It's really challenging, and they say to start with the mobile first and then figure out what else you need from there. It's right. Yeah, it's changed a lot over the years. I really like comic books, and I get a lot of good ideas from them. So this was one that I felt it was worth sharing, the way that they visually convey that something has to come between 2 other actions. Whenever I'm working on instructions and I have to have a screen capture that might tell one or two, more than one thing, I should say. I often number mine, but this, I thought it was a clever way to convey, exactly how this dialogue's going to go. There's no ambiguity. And I thought that was something that I hope to use in some of my instructions at some point, some form of this, because I don't have to ask any questions, which is awesome. other things that you find, not in all comic books, but just in general, good technical communication. We should always remember to use plain language and to vary our sentence length, to leave ample space between our topics, and divide information into useful sections. I mean, we all know to not give people a wall of text. But this is an example where I read a lot of food labels. My kids have food allergies. So I read so many labels, and I'm often confronted with a wall of text every time that I have to try and figure out if they've added something that might hurt my children. This Taquitos box, they actually do an amazing job with not bulleting, but separating out everything. You can tell that they thought about their transitions. They let me know exactly what goes into each one, and the color contrast between the background and the text was something that was really useful for me. These are just things in our everyday lives that can help us think about the work that we do and how things are done well. Another one, if you're busy, just think about your grocery list. Like, I often write it twice, because I'll write it just a straight down grocery list as we run out of stuff, but before I go to the store, I'll separate it into the aisles in the store to make sure I get through there faster. This is a game too. Whenever you're trying to think about how it applies to us professionally, whenever you see something that doesn't quite make sense in an aisle, think about why that store put that there. It's kind of like card sorting whenever you're trying to figure out where to put each page on your knowledge base or on a user interface when you're trying to figure out the different sections. Sorry, I love food. This is my last food example. I hope nobody's hungry. They well-designed cookbooks do this really well too. They follow the same principles that we follow. And this is Harry Wright's, this is called the Student Cookbooks, and the Student Cookbook. It uses ample space. It makes sure that the instructions that you really need, the thing that is most important to you, is right there in your face. But if you're interested in things that probably won't be as important to other people, like the price of each ingredient, it's still there and it's still easy to see, but it's bumped down. It's not competing for the priority of your eye. And I think my favorite part about this is the visualization that they actually use for if somebody doesn't know how to make a hamburger. These guys tell you exactly how to do it. That's a pretty fun idea for inspiration that isn't exactly where you normally look for it. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go straight into infographics. And I wish that I would have thought about this more over the years, because recently I really started to think about how much people have used visualizations to influence the public for thousands of years. I think this is one that Florence Nightingale did in the 1800s, because generals British generals during the Crimean War were not giving the soldiers enough attention. They were not, I'm not saying this well, soldiers were dying of disease in the barracks because the sanitation was so bad. And they could say that to them, but they're like, oh, okay. But then Florence Nightingale went out and she made these rose diagrams to say, no, look at how many soldiers are dying from disease. And she plastered this everywhere. And this is how she got sanitation fixed back. And this was like 200 years ago. It's fun. If you Google this, and it's a good, I can send these slides around too. If you want some of the sources. This was a great podcast from 99% Invisible where I found this one. And if you listen to it, there have been critics who said, yeah, she could have done this better. But yeah, we're 200 years later. For where she was, she accomplished her goal and it got the point across. And that would be a fun exercise for someone in our business who wanted to show how it could be better conveyed. Sure, go ahead, that's awesome. But for 200 years ago, this is pretty cool. So my last slide is about infographics. And as we all know, we don't want to just slap whatever we want up on a piece of cardboard and call it an infographic. We know that good infographics follow Norman's principles. They communicate simple messages that are easy to absorb and recall later. Like it says on the slide, they visually represent the information by using illustrations. They use illustrated characters and bold colors to grab our attention. They make them simple, not overloaded with graphics or content, kind of like flags, right? And they enforce active voice as much as possible. you want to think about an infographic as whatever you're trying to tell the person that's looking at it, they have to get the gist of that in an elevator ride. And granted, the building I work in has really slow elevators, but still, you only have a couple seconds to give someone the basic ideas about a topic to get them thinking, which is kind of like, this was a little bit more than a couple seconds, but it was a little condensed version of basic ideas that I hope got you thinking about things that could help you in the way that we apply our work to the world all around us. So in closing, I just want to thank all of you for coming here and listening to me talk for this time. And also to remind you that, you know, at the beginning I said I was all worked up, that I couldn't better myself. I felt like I couldn't better myself professionally when my dad was sick and my first son was a toddler. I hope you all know how silly that was on me. I appreciate so much that I got that time with them. And I hope you can learn from what I did and what Norman taught me, that whenever we're in one of those places in our life, and we all have those times when everything is crazy, remember to do exactly what Norman says here. I'll read his quote. Enjoy yourself. Walk around the world examining the details of design. Learn how to observe. Take pride in the little things that help, and think kindly of the person who so thoughtfully put them there. That's all I have for you tonight, but I'm around if you want to chat after. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I think it was a great presentation. Now I have a question for you, just to maybe get things rolling a little bit. As you were learning this information, what do you think was your biggest hurdle in really being able to apply this to your work?
Making myself do it, because you know how it is whenever it's like a New Year's resolution, right? It's like, yes, I'm gonna do this today, and then you're like going to bed at night, you're like, oh no, I didn't do it again, and then you think about the next thing. So I still keep a paper planner because I like to write things down and keep track of stuff. It makes me happy. So I'd start to write it down. As soon as I'd see something, I'd be like, okay, now let's think about how this works. I added it to my to-do list every day.
Cool. And what do you think? You mentioned reading Norman's book as one way to get a great introduction. And of course, I think you've given us a very good introduction to UX design and UX writing. Are there other resources or other things that you think might be good, or suggestions on how people can get more involved in doing UX design and UX writing and putting that mindset into their everyday practices?
Yeah, for sure. The one thing that whenever I worked at the same company for about 10 years. I had been a technical writer, just a technical writer for years before that. And then I went to a specific software company that just needed people to do extra stuff. We were understaffed, right? And I enjoyed technical writing. It was great, but I would see everyone's always kind of feels overwhelmed at work, right? So I would look for things where people needed help with. Oh, okay, you're card sorting. Do you need help to just like even track down Post-it notes for people and start to work with folks, or in a not nasty way, but say whenever someone would, I remember I was in a meeting when okay was written wrong, and they're like, oh, that doesn't matter. And I was like, well, actually it does. It like slows down the way that people think if you have your text wrong. And then you just kind of become that person that starts to make yourself available, and then you're the one that they go to for help with stuff. And then as opportunities come up, that's how I kind of transitioned from just technical writer over to, I was a UX writer. And then when you're doing UX writing as part of that team, they would get overwhelmed. So they're like, hey, this is a simple mock-up. Can you work on this basic, just balsamic mock-up? And it's like, this is what you want, right? And then that transitioned into more jobs on the design side.
Sure. Sounds very similar to the things that I did too. I think there's also a nice crossover with content strategy, because you were talking about like the card sorting and things like that. That ties in very tightly with in content strategy, figuring out taxonomies of things and content models. And when I was with one job, I had to very closely work with the UX designer to the point that, I would be even saying, are you sure you want that there? And when I had left, the manager was like, well, I think you should keep going with learning more about UX design, because you seem to have a handle on, at least visually, what you need to be doing as it fits in with your content models or that you're trying to build with whatever, in my case, was digital sites and things like that. Now, Albar has two questions. He has one about what are your thoughts about like how would one get involved with UX research? And he also asks, which skills do you need to become a UX writer? Maybe you can address the second one first, which is which skills do you need to become a UX writer, do you think?
Sure. Basically, you just want to be a good technical writer. I think can transition over pretty well, and you want to do all the things that apply to good technical communication, like the active voice, the thinking about read up on 508. Danielle and I were talking about this yesterday. There's a lot of things that you don't think about whenever you have sight or you don't have a disability that someone else has. Like whenever you see a lot of screens, or you used to see a lot of screens where they'd be like, click here for instructions, where if someone can't visually look at the screen like that, and they just are having it read to them by JAWS or one of the other reading programs, some folks will only have the links read to them. So if every link on the page says, click here, click here, click here, you're not helping that user. So I think those are skills that you would want to hone are the ones that make you a good technical writer. Read about, the things that you do every day probably for that, as well as reading up with the good tech writing type, the masters of the field, like Ginny Reddish and Steve Krug's book is always a great place to think about how to get the right words on the screen.
What did you mean? Definitely an expert on 508 things already, so I think that's probably you've already got a leg up on us for that sort of stuff, Albara. So but there's a lot that goes on with that for sure. What you and I were talking about just now was the idea of also not just the click here because people don't know what it means, but there's a certain amount of digital literacy. Maybe 20 years ago, click here would have worked. But now between mobile and desktop, for lack of a better term, you need to be able to switch off. It has to do with that, not only with the responsive design of how things are sized, but also you can't click on a phone. You can select something, you can tap on it, but you can't tap on your computer monitor necessarily unless you have a fancy touch screen. So, you have to kind of make adjustments with your language on how to do that in some cases. And I was giving Stephanie the example that I had a couple years ago working for an insurance company where they were making multiple things. It was like, you don't want to use submit. We don't want to use save. Do we say click? Do we say select? And, we would be talking about like one word for an hour just to figure out which one would be the right one just to select something. Do we want to say pick this or select or save this one? Or it would be crazy just about one little tiny button just to make sure that the functionality was correct. So it's being conscious of things like that I think make a difference. And so the transition, if you're a technical writer, I don't think is that difficult, as you said, because we have a lot of those observant skills already. So, and as far as I think UX research, I think it's a lot of that has to do with more the doing a case study and watching other people, how they decide what that is. In a sense, it's kind of doing the research of here's a mock-up of something. Let's see how they actually walk through, because maybe the way we think it's going to be done is not the way people poke through things. I had to do like some UX research classes for my certificate. So I remember having to do this, and we did something just simple with like, okay, go into Yahoo Mail and tell me how you would create an email, and they would look through it, and I'd have to record all of their facial movements, and they would have to speak out loud what they were thinking, things like that. And I used my son and my husband, they both had very different approaches on how they decided to do it. So that's part of what UX research is. And everything that Stephanie talked about kind of feeds all into that.
And the biggest thing that I had that not surprised me, but my biggest challenge there is people are so willing to help you. I started my career as a reporter where every time you had to call somebody, they thought that you were out to get them. And I totally get it. Reporters have a bad reputation, but then to go in and to talk to people who actually, like, they want to please you. They will want to give you the right answer. And you're like, no, there is no right answer. Just trying to, when you're talking to folks, make sure they know that you're testing the system, not them. There is no wrong answer. We're trying to figure out what the system could do better, not what they could do better. Because whenever something doesn't work, it's the system, it's not them. And that's really fun to look at on both sides of it, because I've been fortunate to work in places where, you know, you work up the questions and you go in. And first, we had this joke on my one team, we called it therapy. So whenever we would go in to improve a system, we would go in with no intention other than just to let people air their grievances and tell us how much they hated it and how bad it was and why couldn't this be better, what's wrong with it. So we're like, okay, well, they had their therapy session, let's see what we can glean from that, and then we'll go back with more specific questions after that to see how we can move forward from there. And then as you make your changes, you would be able to go in and kind of test it with folks, always with the mindset to let them know. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I hope you got the answers. If you don't, my email's there. Feel free. I love to talk about this stuff.
Well, even what, as you said, there's no wrong answer. So even saying I'm confused is a correct answer. You know, that's
right, 100%.
And then you just have to say, well, what are you confused about? You know, and why we're right. And that helps you hone in on what exactly you need to fix or start thinking about. So
for sure.
Does anyone else have any questions or things that they've observed that they feel would be helpful to the conversation? Going once, going twice? Don't all jump in at once? Okay.
I'll just reiterate, Danielle, like one thing that you said about no matter what you think of whatever you've done, like you are spot on in saying that watching users actually use it is so key. And it's almost good to do that early on in the process if you can.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it gives you such valuable feedback, and then you can refine it going forward from there.
Yeah,
100%. And I've worked with people who say that they're big survey people, like, let's just blast the survey out. And there's valuable information that can come from surveys, but nothing can compare to talking to, 6 or 8 users at least, because you'll always have the super users and the folks, everyone has they're coming from different cultures, different backgrounds. So there's going to be some similarities, but there's things you're going to miss if you're just talking to the same people.
Right, but I meant beyond talking, like what Danielle said, actually observing them use it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's like hands down the best feedback you're ever going to see.
Oh, I totally agree. In my brain, I'm saying talking, but I'm sitting behind them while I do it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And it's never what you think also. They will be stumbling over something, or they will be pondering or not going through. Like, it'll never be the thing you think that will trip them up. It just amazes me how user studies, it always pulls something out that you had not even considered, because you're kind of wired to think of it one way.
Yeah.
Right. Because you've been looking at it for so long.
Yeah, and I think sometimes this is why you want different groups in too. To your point, Laurie, is that I'm thinking about one of the current projects I'm working on right now, and evidently it's been all these developers who've been working on it, and they supposedly know all about these things. And I'm looking at it, and they won't give us any training on this new tool that we have to do documentation for. And they're like, it's intuitive, and I'm like, I'm looking at it, and I like to think that I'm a relatively bright person, and I'm looking at it and saying, no, it's not. I have to poke around, and nobody should be, part of the whole thing is that good UX means you don't have to poke around. It truly is intuitive. Like you said, you see the curved bottom to the chair, that's a chair. Little things like that make a difference. Or, the arrow going to where the COVID shots are, it's going to take you to the wrong place. So there was little things I said, and I was saying, well, I hope you're going to be putting help text in, because this is not, I can't even figure it out, and I know what I'm supposed to be looking for. Or, for mine, I work in HR. So it's sort of things like people don't necessarily know the nuances between what's a leave of absence versus a paid time off. There's like little, or what's a leave versus a leave of absence. It's like crazy stuff, and they're not going to know those differences going into this tool. They're just going to be poking around till they find what they need to say, yeah, I need to take some parental leave, or I have to take bereavement leave, or I want to take vacation. So, it can get confusing very easily. So sometimes they don't always bring, it's all developers and they think they know what they're doing. Whereas I think with technical communicators, we think about the audience, not what function does it have to do. We think about who has to actually use it. So we use that superpower as much as we can as technical writers or technical communicators. For sure.
For sure.
So does anyone else have any questions or any last words, Stephanie?
I just appreciate your time. It was nice to talk with all of you. Thanks.
Great. Well, again, everybody, we really appreciate everybody coming. I think we learned a lot. I think it's been a great conversation. We will have this presentation up on our website probably in the next 24 to 48 hours, if not sooner. And we appreciate you coming, and please continue to support the Philadelphia Metro chapter. Again, Stephanie, thank you for giving us this presentation, and we hope you all have a great night. Thanks a lot.